Welcome to another episode of Steele Creek Explorer. I'm your host, Jeremy Stout, and this time we felt like spring was in the air and might want to talk about some lovely additions that are on the hearts and minds of many of our area residents, and that's the spring wildflowers. Of course, you might already know that wildflowers are actually a pretty specialized group of plants. Not all the plants of the world have flowers. The pine tree that you see behind me is part of a group of plants called the Gymnosperms. These are plants that have no flowering parts whatsoever. But our angiosperms, or flowering plants, make up many of our region's most beautiful spring and summer and fall flora. These are the angiosperms, or flowering plants, and these include trees, shrubs, vines, forbs, and other of the plants. But of course, what unites them all is this structure right here. The specialized leaves that are usually very colorful that we call flowers. Of course, many of these, like the dandelions, will bloom throughout an entire season. You know, all the warm months of the year you could find dandelions growing in your yard or lawn outside your workplace. But many of our wildflowers of the area are what we call ephemerals. They only bloom for just a few days, maybe a couple of weeks out of the year, and it's the only time out of the year you can find them. So join us this time as we show you some of the beautiful spring wildflowers like this red bud here before me, and we'll see what we can find out there in Steele Creek Park. Well, of course, one of the most spectacular wildflower displays we have every year is the blooming of the red buds. Such a small and seemingly inconspicuous flower. When they bloom all at once in all the trees of the region, usually around early to mid-April, depending on the year, it is one of the most beautiful sights we have because these tiny little flowers completely cover these small trees like the one you see behind me. And so they just give us this amazing show of pinks and purples throughout the area for a couple of weeks every year. But also, these small little flowers are a great way to talk about flower anatomy. The redbud flowers, while they're small, they have a very unique shape to them. And that's one thing that typifies all the different flowers, is that they have a very special relationship with their pollinators. Usually insects, but also hummingbirds. That's why flowers exist, is to bring pollinators to collect the pollen from inside the flower and take that to the pollen receiving organs on another flower of another plant. So here we have these bright, showy petals attracting insects, especially lepidopterans such as moths and butterflies, and hymenopterans such as ants and bees and wasps. But inside these petals, you also have these structures that produce the pollen. These are called the stamens, and inside you have also long structures called the stigma, which are attached to the female carpel, which is, once it's pollinated, what will produce the fruits. And maybe there might even be a little pollen left in these stamens. We might be able to see some dust off. Now here's one of my favorites of the middle and early spring. This is often called Virginia bluebell, or some folks just call them bluebells. The actual name for this flower is the Virginia cowslip, which is not related to the bluebells of Europe and the Old World. This is a common wildflower of moist and rich woodlands, sometimes growing in shady places, and sometimes they can form spectacularly thick clumps on the forest floor. Oftentimes when you find large clumps of these out in the woods, it's indicative of an old historic home site where the folks would plant those in their front gardens for their beauty. So, of course, where can you go to find wildflowers growing? Well, of course, you can go almost anywhere. You can go to your front yard. If you're not up for a big hike out into the woods, come to the Nature Center. In addition to our butterfly garden out front, which has blooming flowers all year round, we also have a more shaded area wildflower garden off to the side. And this is a great place to find many of our native wildflower species, including some of my favorites, these very beautiful violets. These look like very different flowers, and they are, but they're actually part of the same species. These are both called the common blue violet. The white one with the purple center is also known as the Confederate violet, and was believed to be its own species, but is now known to just be a different color variation of the common blue. You can find these over many landscaped areas, and they're very common here at Steele Creek Park. Well, when we come back, we will leave the Nature Center and show you some of the wilder wildflowers of Steele Creek Park. Here's one of my favorite spring and summer wildflowers. Many will recognize the heart-shaped leaves on the forest floor of wild ginger. Very few people recognize the wildflower that it produces. There's a closely related species called the little brown jug, and it gets its name for these little brown jug-shaped wildflowers that grow very close to the forest floor. They even blend into the leaf litter at the bottom, and these are flowers that are pollinated by forest-dwelling insects and other invertebrates. Ants, spiders, wingless wasps, and even slugs may be the pollinators for wild ginger. One of the most beautiful of the spring wildflowers are any of the species of native Trillium that we have. Of course, the name Trillium refers to the three-leaf shape of the plant and the flower. But as beautiful as these blooms are, they only last for a few days out of the year in the mid-spring. And also, even though they look beautiful, some of the pollinators for Trilliums are insects that oftentimes are found feeding on or near carrion, rotten flesh, like this horsefly on my thumb. The flowers oftentimes stink of rotting meat or wet dog. Well, we've certainly found a lot of our beautiful spring wildflowers today. And don't forget, when you're exploring your local wildflower diversity, whether it's around your home and your local parks, remember that these are a natural part of our ecosystems. And it's important not to pick wild plants that you find growing out in nature. Take a camera along, take some great photos, but leave them growing where they are. Don't forget to bring a field guide out or come to the Nature Center and utilize some of ours, but be sure to come to Steele Creek Park, where you can be the explorer.
Bye.